Hey there, my name's Julia. Welcome back to my channel. I'm tired today, but I am showing up like I promised myself I would. I've been really tired all week and I went to bed earlier than normal last night, like half an hour, 45 minutes earlier than I normally do, really hoping that I would get a good night's sleep. And the baby just had other plans. So I'm pretty tired today, but I've been just getting some stuff done around the house to just get things back in order. It's been in disarray for a while, so I think I'm gonna do a little bit of baking. If you saw my video recently where I made and canned applesauce, I used all of the apples that we picked apple picking for this applesauce. But since then, I have picked up another peck of apples from the Apple Fest in the neighborhood near us that recently happened. And I also got basically another half a peck through my CSA box, my produce box that I get every week. So I have a lot of apples to go through. We also don't really have anything sweet in the house right now, and I've really been craving some sweet treats. So I think I'm gonna dive in and get some delicious apple treats made up. Here we are in the kitchen. It is in progress of getting cleaned and tidied, and now we're gonna dirty it up again, because that's what a kitchen is for. I found a recipe for apple bread on Pinterest. I will link this recipe down below. It has really good reviews. 5-star rating out of 145 votes or something like that. It seems like it's gonna be a winner. I looked at the comments as well. I always look at the comments on recipes to see if people made substitutions, if they had any issues, things like that. And it sounds like the main issue that people had is that it just took longer to bake. So that's a good thing to know, that I should just be cognizant that it may take longer in the oven. But I think this one is gonna be a winner. I'm going to get this recipe whipped up, pulled together, and in the oven, and then hopefully I'll have a nice delicious treat to enjoy later today. The first couple things I did were mix together my brown sugar and cinnamon. This is going to be sort of the swirl layer and topping in the cake and the bread. And then I also melted half a cup of butter, which is going to be mixed into the dough, the batter. So now that both of those are done, I'm going to get started pulling together the rest of the recipe. My large mixing bowl, actually you can see it right here, is in use. I have some bread dough rising that I'll bake off later today. So I have my second largest bowl, and I'm hoping that this will do the trick. The first part of the rest of this recipe is mixing together 2 large eggs with half a cup of white granulated sugar. My half cup measure still has a little bit of brown sugar on it, but that is not a problem. I'm not worried about it. There's our half cup. Next, I'm gonna add in my half cup of melted butter and a teaspoon of this beautiful homemade vanilla extract. But if you've been around for any number of my baking videos, we do not measure vanilla extract. We pour from the heart. Get all of this mixed well. And now for dry ingredients, we need a cup and a half of all-purpose flour. I'm running a little low on flour, but this should be enough to get us through this recipe. I'm using a half cup measure here again. So I'm gonna do 3 nice half cups. I need 1 teaspoon of baking powder and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I'm not gonna measure that. I'm just gonna pour a little bit into my hand and call that good. All right, I'm going to fold this together until just combined. And I'm realizing now I should have prepped my apples already, because I will need 2 cups of peeled and chopped apples, which I have not done yet. You can see I've been eating through some of these apples as well. They're not all going to be saved for baking, but we've got quite a lot of apples to go through. And that is our 2 cups of apples, so that's gonna get dumped right in. This is a lot of apples to fold into this very thick batter. Here I have my baking dish that is greased and lined with a little bit of parchment. And I'm gonna put about half of this mixture into the bottom of this baking dish. I'm gonna do my best to spread this evenly. And then about 3/4 of our cinnamon and sugar mix is gonna go right on top of this. The rest of the batter is gonna go on top. And then finally, the rest of this mixture is gonna go on the top. And then I'm gonna take a knife and just do a little bit of swirling. That's not really as easy as I thought it would be because we've got big chunks of apple and also the batter is really thick, but just getting it a little swirled in. And that's our bread ready to go in the oven. My oven is already preheated to 350, so I'm gonna pop it in there. And the recipe says to bake for 30 to 45 minutes, but like I said, the comments said it took closer to 60 minutes. So I'm gonna set my timer for 45 minutes and check it at that point, but I'm guessing we're gonna go closer to 60, especially because my oven tends to take a little bit longer on average than a recipe calls for. Okay, it has been 55 minutes. I just pulled the bread out of the oven. After 45 minutes, I tested its doneness with a toothpick. It was still completely wet, so I put it back in the oven for another 10 minutes, and I tented some tin foil over the top, which was what some other folks said they did in the comments, just to make sure that the top didn't get overly brown or burned while the inside finished cooking. It looks and smells so delicious. Once it cools down a little bit, I will cut into it and give it a taste test. Okay, we are going to do a taste test.
It's good. This is very good. 10 out of 10, 5 stars.
That's what 165 other people thought too.
Really?
Mm-hmm. That's one apple recipe down. Let's see what else I make. It has been a couple days. That apple bread is totally gone. It was so good. We devoured it. I will definitely be making more of that this season. We've still got a lot of apples to go through. I've been trying to find interesting recipes. Like apple bread is amazing, but I don't want to just make like 4 different kinds of apple bread. Definitely gonna make a pie soon, but I found a recipe that I'm really excited to try. It is apple crisp shortbread bars. I have never made shortbread. It doesn't seem like it's a particularly hard thing to make, but I've never made it before. And adding a little bit of fall flair to it, I'm very excited. So let's get going. The first step of this recipe is to get half a cup of butter creamed. The recipe says to let it go in your mixer for at least 5 minutes until it turns white. So I'm gonna get that started first. Then I'm gonna preheat my oven to 300 and line an 8x8 baking dish with some parchment paper so I can pop this out easily when all is said and done. There's just not a lot of butter in here, so my mixer isn't doing a great job at creaming it. I am scraping down the sides, but I think what I'm gonna do, it's been going for a few minutes, so I'm gonna add my sugar. The next step, once it's creamed, is to add the sugar, vanilla, and salt. So I think I'm just gonna add my sugar and let it cream a little while longer with the sugar added, and then I'll add just a pinch of salt and a splash of vanilla. So that's what I'm gonna do. All right, this is looking pretty good. It's nice and light in color. So I'm going to just throw in a pinch of salt because I did use salted butter. I always use salted butter. It's just what I keep on hand. So I'm not going to do all the salt that it calls for, but that salt is important to get a good balance in flavor. And some beautiful homemade vanilla extract. Just a little spin. The only thing left in the shortbread is a cup of flour, so I'm just going to reuse my quarter cup measure. Perfect amount of flour. This smells so good. Just sweet and buttery. I'm going to get this into my baking dish and just press it firmly into an even layer. Shortbread is all ready to go, so I'm gonna pop this into the oven for 15 minutes at 300. I'm gonna get my apples and streusel topping prep now. This apple mixture is actually more like a traditional apple pie filling. I'm glad I reread my recipe. So it needs 2 tablespoons of flour, 2 tablespoons of sugar, a teaspoon of cinnamon, which I'm not going to measure. And then it calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, but I am gonna put in a little bit of ground clove instead because I don't have nutmeg, so same idea. I'll get this really nicely mixed. A slightly bigger bowl would probably have been a good idea, but I'm not gonna dirty another bowl. Beautiful. And finally, I'm gonna get the streusel topping, which is a 1/2 cup of flour, 3/4 cup of brown sugar, and finally a 1/4 cup of butter at room temperature, or melted, but mine is already room temp. My timer just went off on the shortbread, so this is gonna come out of the oven. I'm gonna raise the temp to 350 and get the rest of this finished up. I'm just gonna cut in this butter. Again, slightly bigger bowl probably would have been a good idea. Okay, my oven just came up to temperature and this streusel is just about mixed together. Assembling is gonna be pretty easy. I just take 1/2 of my streusel, put it right on top of the shortbread. Then I get my apples. Try to get these laying down as flat as possible. I could take the time to actually arrange them, lay them flat, but I am not really interested in the artistry of that today. And then finally, we get the rest of this beautiful streusel spread over the top. This already looks amazing. So I'm gonna get it in the oven for 30 minutes. But remember, always read the comments on the recipe. People said that they tended to have it go longer, both to make sure that the apples were really cooked all the way soft and to get a nice golden brown color on that streusel. So I'll put it in for 30, I'll check it, but we'll probably do more than that. Now I gotta get this kitchen cleaned. Okay, I don't even know how long this has been in the oven. At 30 minutes, I just turned the timer off and I've just been checking. I'm guessing it's been another 15 minutes, and I think I'm going to pull it out. I just don't want the shortbread to get too overcooked, but we are getting some nice browning on the streusel topping. So here we go. Honestly, I probably could have left it in for even longer. The edges are definitely starting to get nice and brown, but I do think I'm gonna keep it out of the oven, be done baking. Oh, it smells so good. Now this is actually the hardest part coming up. This has to cool all the way, and then it has to sit in the fridge for 2 hours to make sure everything sets and sort of like solidifies together before you cut it into bars. Otherwise the whole thing is just gonna fall apart. So I will check back in later tonight once we have this served up for dessert. All right, it is many hours later. We just finished dinner, baby is in bed. It is time for dessert. So the first thing I notice is the top looks a little wet, but around the edges it does look nice and set. So we're gonna see. It does look like everything is holding together really well, and I can see we've got our layers of shortbread. Let's see, I think I'm gonna cut into 16 squares. They look really good. That's really good. It's like all the best parts of a pie, but instead of like a buttery crust, it's a buttery cookie. That's really good.
Very good.
5 stars. All right, we are back with one more apple recipe. Again, this is another new one I haven't made. I originally set out looking for a recipe for a tarte tatin, but I don't have a pan that's the right size that can go from stovetop to oven. Instead, I found a recipe for a French apple tart. While I don't have a tart tin, especially one that has a removable bottom, I have an idea and a plan that I hope is going to work out just fine. The first thing I had to pull together was the tart crust, so I'll show that footage right now. In my bowl, I need 1 1/4 cups of flour, a tablespoon of sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, which I'm just gonna measure in my hand, and then 8 tablespoons or 1/2 cup of butter. This would be a lot easier if I had a food processor, but I don't, so I'll do it by hand. It's not ideal, but it is definitely possible. So what I'm gonna do is take my butter and just cut it into small pieces. This I pulled right out of the freezer, so it is nice and cold. That's what we want. And then my butter is going to go in. I'm gonna get in here with my hands and just work on breaking up the butter into little pieces and getting the flour sort of incorporated. This would also be easier if I had a pastry cutter. I could go in here with a fork, and I might end up doing that just because this butter is quite frozen still, but I'd rather it be frozen than too soft. I've got this worked in pretty nicely, so now I'm gonna pour in a 1/4 cup plus a tablespoon of ice water. I just had that chilling in my freezer. Again, this would be easier with a food processor, but I'm just gonna gently mix that water in. And our goal is to really work this as little as possible. So I'm just gonna make sure that I can get it incorporated somewhat. And then I'm going to dump it right out onto my surface. The goal is not to knead this, but just to get it mixed enough that it holds together. This is still quite crumbly, so I think I'm just gonna wet my hands and get back in here. Truly just a splash of water on my hands. Maybe all I need. I'm gonna pop this in the fridge just for a couple of minutes while I prepare my baking dish. In lieu of a tart pan that has a removable bottom, I'm gonna use just a regular pie dish and put some strips of parchment paper so that they sort of stick out of the edges, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to lift the whole tart out, probably using an extra set of hands borrowed from my husband to do that. I'm thinking that's gonna accomplish the same thing. Obviously, I'm not gonna get that beautiful sort of scalloped edge that a tart pan would have, but I think this is gonna work. With a sufficient amount of flour on my surface, I am going to very carefully flatten my round of dough and get it rolled flat. And you can even see these beautiful pieces of butter still intact in the dough. That's what's going to give a really flaky, light crust. Carefully, I'm going to transfer this. Oh no, that's not good. I'm just making sure that my little tabs are accessible at the edges. Perfect. And in fact, I'm sort of gonna double up on the crust here. There isn't much rustic about French baking, but we're gonna make a little rustic edge to this crust. Now I'm gonna pop this beautiful crust into the freezer for 30 minutes. It's been about a half an hour. I'm gonna grab my pie dish out of the freezer and start arranging my apples just to see exactly how many I need. I've been chopping them up already and keeping them in little fans that I'm just going to spread in my pie dish. That seems to be just the perfect amount of apples to go in my pie dish. So the only thing left to do is sprinkle this with some sugar and dot it with additional butter, and then we'll bake in the oven. So here's a 1/4 cup of sugar. This just needs to get sprinkled evenly. And you might notice one of my apples I started to peel, and then I thought, wait a second, the pictures from this recipe have beautiful edges of apples baked on. So I went back and double checked the recipe, and no, you are not supposed to peel the apples. So I'm glad I didn't waste my time. Plus, it looks extra beautiful this way. That is my oven just in time. I'm gonna dot the top of this with another 1/4 cup of butter. And that is all she wrote. This tart is ready to go in the oven. I'm gonna set my timer for 15 minutes and just double check to make sure it's not browning too quickly. Otherwise, I'll turn the temperature down for the rest of the bake. Ooh, we got that late afternoon light streaming in the window. I just pulled this out of the oven, and if I'm being honest, it kind of just looks like a very buttery mess. I'm wondering if that's because my pie dish is maybe a little bit smaller than a tart dish would have been. But the crust is perfectly brown, the apples are soft, so I decided I was just gonna pull it out of the oven and I'll let it cool, we'll see what happens. This might be one that we serve chilled, and it might just be buttery, we'll see. We're doing our taste test. I mean, it's just sugary apples and buttery crust. That's pretty good. I think I could have baked it for a little bit longer. I was worried about the crust over baking. The apples could have been a little bit softer. But other than that, it's pretty good.
It's very good.
That's what you say in every clip in this video. Every taste test. It's very good.
I also just like eating, so.
I mean, there's a lot of butter and sugar in all these recipes, so. I honestly thought this wasn't gonna be a big winner and I probably wouldn't make it again. I would make this again. It's really simple, and if I had made the dough ahead of time, there's very little that goes into this. It's just slicing the apples and then you sprinkle with sugar and dot with butter. So I'm a fan. Thank you so much for hanging out with me while I did all of this apple baking. This was so much fun. It was actually really exciting to try new recipes, and we definitely found some winners that are getting added to the repertoire for next year. We still have a ton of apples left, so I'm definitely gonna keep baking. I'll probably make a ton of that apple bread and stick it in the freezer. I've already baked more loaves since I filmed that part, and yeah, it's a winner for sure. If you have any apple recipes that you love, I would love to hear about them because I've got a fridge still full of apples. So let me know what you love to make and maybe I'll try it sometime soon. Thank you again for hanging out. I'm so glad you're here. Don't forget to subscribe. It really does help my channel grow, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.